"You served me cold leftovers at Thanksgiving," Linda said, standing firm in the doorway of the house she co-owned. Her son Ryan looked away. His wife Clare froze mid-sip. Linda unfolded the eviction notice. "Your refinance is denied. The deed? Still has my name." The mother-in-law they underestimated just took back their home. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." The laughter rang through the dining room, full and warm, the kind that usually made holidays feel like home, but not for Linda. She stared down at the plate in front of her. While everyone else had heaping servings of honey-glazed turkey, buttery mashed potatoes, and golden rolls that steamed as they were broken apart, her plate held something else entirely. Scraps. A few limp green beans, a slice of turkey so cold it was curling at the edges, and stuffing that looked like it had been spooned from the bottom of the tray. It wasn't just food. It was a message. "Oh no, did we forget to heat that?" Claire's voice chimed out, sugar-dipped and sharp, already turning back toward her wine glass without waiting for a response. "Guess the microwave's always there if someone's feeling nostalgic." Someone. Not Mom. Not Linda. Someone. A few of the guests, Claire's co-workers, neighbors, Ryan's old college buddy, shifted uncomfortably, but no one said anything. One guy laughed awkwardly, then reached for the gravy. Linda's fingers tightened around her fork. She kept her smile painted on, like it had been practiced in front of a mirror. "It's fine," she murmured, mostly to herself. Clare was already swirling her wine again, leaned in close to one of the women beside her. "She likes the simple stuff," she whispered, not low enough. "Doesn't trust anything she can't pronounce." Another giggle, another round of clinking glasses. Linda sat frozen in the hum of embarrassment, her ears ringing louder than the faint jazz playing through the overhead speakers. She had raised Ryan on her own, scrubbed hotel bathrooms and balanced checkbooks in a diner booth. She didn't need a silver platter to feel proud. But this? This wasn't about food. It was about being reminded that she no longer belonged. Her son, Ryan, didn't look up once. He was busy carving another slice of turkey for Claire's mother, who sat wrapped in a cashmere shawl with a crystal flute of champagne, like a guest of honor. Linda placed her fork down, quietly. She folded her napkin over her lap, even though no one cared to look, and she looked around the house. Her house, in a way, at least partially. Her savings had covered the down payment, $80,000 pulled from a pension, without a moment's hesitation, when Ryan and Clare had found their dream home. Funny, how fast dreams rewrote history. "Excuse me," Linda said softly, standing. No one stopped her. No one even asked if she was okay, as if she were just another piece of old furniture shifting itself to the corner. She walked down the hallway, away from the chatter and warmth, toward a room that smelled faintly of lemon polish and forgotten memories. The guest room, her room. She stood for a moment in the doorway, then crossed to the bookshelf. Most of the photo frames were of Clare and Ryan's wedding, their dog, their travels. But on the top shelf, tucked behind a fake succulent, was an old photo in a wood frame, the corners slightly chipped. Her wedding photo. Linda brushed the dust off it with her sleeve. She looked younger there, wild-eyed and brave. The man beside her, her late husband, had once said she had a fire in her that could burn down walls. She hadn't felt that fire in years. But tonight, it flickered again. She didn't cry. She didn't break. Instead, she walked to the nightstand, opened the drawer with deliberate care, and pulled out a slim, old flip phone, the kind no one paid attention to anymore. She flipped it open and pressed 2 on speed dial. A pause, then a soft ring. A male voice answered on the second one. "Ms. Carter?" Linda's voice was calm, composed, even gentle. "It's time," she said. "Let's talk about our arrangement." Quietly. A beat. "Understood." She closed the phone and stood there for a moment, listening to the muffled clinks of silverware and laughter echoing down the hallway. Then she whispered, not with rage, but resolve, "They'll never see me coming." Linda makes a call that sets her plan into motion. They said she was lucky to have a roof over her head. But Linda remembered the cashier's blank stare when she withdrew $80,000 in a cashier's check, her hand trembling not from doubt, but from the weight of love. It had been a spring afternoon, 6 years ago. Ryan called her, breathless with excitement. "Mom, we found it! The perfect house, but we're just short." Claire had chimed in seconds later, giddy, "If we don't close this week, we'll lose it." So Linda did what mothers do. She handed over her security, her freedom, her cushion for the years ahead. No hesitation, no contract, just trust. Now she sat at the kitchen counter with a lukewarm cup of tea and a bitter aftertaste of regret. Claire breezed in wearing a cream cashmere robe, her hair twisted into a bun too perfect for a lazy morning. She gave Linda a passing glance, then poured herself sparkling water into a wine glass. "Morning," Linda offered softly. Claire smiled, the kind that came with hidden fangs. "Good morning. Feeling a little better today?" she asked, as though Linda had a fever or, worse, a fragile mind. "Just fine," Linda replied. She kept her voice even, her hands folded politely over her lap. "Wasn't much hungry last night." Claire chuckled, her tone dipped in syrup. "Oh, Linda, you know you're so extra sensitive. We all just assumed you'd had dinner already." Linda said nothing. The cold plate, the laughter. It had been a small wound with a deep bleed. Claire sipped from her glass and looked over her shoulder as she walked away. "By the way, Ryan and I were talking. Maybe next year we'll finally remodel the guest room. You know, for when real guests come over." Real guests. Linda's eyes followed her, unblinking. Later that day, Claire was on a video call in the living room. She had the volume too loud, as always, oblivious or indifferent to the fact Linda was just steps away folding laundry. "She still mopes around like it's her house," Claire laughed to the person on the screen, twirling her hair. "I can't wait until this old lady moves out. Then we'll finally have the space." Linda didn't drop the shirt in her hands. She folded it slower, smoother. Her face revealed nothing, but her chest burned with something more focused than anger. That night, when the house was asleep, she moved like a shadow to the built-in cabinet in the hallway. It was supposed to hold linens, but one drawer in the back was hers, unmarked, unspoken for, but entirely her own. She reached in and pulled out a thin folder, rubber-banded and still wrapped in plastic from years ago. Inside it, copies of the original deed, bank statements, and one notarized letter from the escrow office with her name, printed in full caps, beside the words, "Co-owner." Claire had called her a guest. But this guest had signed the damn deed. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't touched in 3 years. Mr. Jonas Kane, attorney. The last message was from 2020. Just a Happy New Year text. She tapped a new message. "Hi, Jonas. I need to confirm something quietly. Please call me in the morning. Linda Carter." She hit send, then sat down at the edge of the bed. Her fingers grazed over the documents. She stared at the ink, at her own name, at the evidence of a version of herself no one here remembered. Not the woman who raised a son through night shifts and double shifts. Not the woman who handled payroll for a 10-person company with nothing but a calculator and a pen. Not the woman who once balanced a life with no help, no recognition, and no apologies. But she remembered. And now, with the weight of the house in one folder and the silence of the night around her, Linda smiled. Just barely. Because tomorrow, the woman they dismissed as a guest would find out if she was still the one who owned the home they slept in. Her phone buzzed at 7:12 a.m. A message from Jonas Kane. "Yes, Linda. Your name is still on the title. 50%. Unrevoked." They didn't scream. But their smiles were sharp enough to cut me out. The next morning, the smell of cinnamon rolls curled through the air like an apology no one intended to make. Linda stood in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, watching the oven timer tick down. The pastries weren't for her. Claire was hosting brunch for her yoga friends. Linda had offered to help earlier, out of habit more than hope. "Oh, no," Claire had said, voice sing-song sweet but stiff. "You should rest. You've done enough." That pause before the last 2 words, it wasn't gratitude. It was dismissal in high heels. Linda sat on the edge of the kitchen stool, watching Clare move with the precision of someone who knew they were being watched. Her hands fluttered over place settings, her hair in a tight ponytail, her lips painted just enough to say I didn't try too hard while clearly trying too hard. "Did you sleep all right?" Linda asked gently. Clare didn't look up. "Fine." The knife she was using to slice strawberries hit the cutting board a little too hard. Chop, chop, chop. "I was thinking," Linda started again, softer, "about maybe fixing up the garden beds in the back. It'd be nice to—" Clare dropped the knife and turned, wiping her hands. "Actually, Ryan and I were talking about redoing the backyard once we have more space." More space? There it was again. The unspoken eviction wrapped in polite grammar. Linda nodded slowly, the way people do when they know the conversation isn't about what it claims to be about. "Of course, I wouldn't want to get in the way." Clare smiled, but her eyes stayed cold. "Exactly." As the morning wore on, Linda retreated to the sunroom with a paperback she didn't bother opening. From behind the thin sliding door, she could hear Clare on speakerphone, loud, carefree, and unaware she had an audience. "I swear the woman's turning into wallpaper," she laughed to whoever was on the line. "Just shuffles around like some Victorian relic. Once she's gone, I'm gutting the kitchen." Open concept, finally. Linda didn't move, didn't blink. "She doesn't even realize how much she slows us down," Clare continued. "Ryan's too nice to say it, but we're doing all this tiptoeing for her. I mean, she's living here rent-free." Linda's fingers closed over the armrest, tight, then loosened. Through the doorway, she caught a flash of Ryan walking past. He didn't see her, or pretended not to. His eyes were locked to his phone, his face unreadable. Linda studied him, searching for guilt, discomfort, some signal that he knew what Clare was doing was wrong. But he just kept walking. That was the worst part. Not the insults, not the whispers, not even the laughter over leftovers. It was the silence, the quiet complicity of her son, who once used to grip her hand after nightmares, who once wrote, "I love you, Mommy," in crayon on the fridge, who once cried in her lap when his dad left. Now he couldn't even look her in the eyes. By mid-afternoon, the house buzzed with guests and Clare's carefully curated joy. Linda slipped away, climbing the stairs with the softness of someone tiptoeing through the last page of a chapter she hadn't asked to end. Inside her room, she pulled out a suitcase from the closet, but not for clothes. She opened the small safe tucked into the back of the linen cupboard. Inside were legal papers, flash drives, and a slim envelope marked "Hold until needed." She placed them all inside the suitcase, stacking folders like armor. Not because she was leaving, but because she was preparing for war. She stood for a long time, watching the hallway from the crack in her door. Downstairs, laughter echoed, Clare's the loudest. Linda didn't smile, but her chin lifted. They thought she was packing her bags. They didn't realize she was unpacking the truth. Linda zipped the suitcase shut, not with sweaters or shoes inside, but with the documents that would soon flip the entire house upside down. They never saw the woman who once ran numbers for a firm. They only saw Grandma. The cardboard box was heavier than Linda remembered, not in weight, but in what it meant to lift it again after all these years. Dust puffed into the air like powdered history as she peeled the lid open in the storage unit she had rented under a pseudonym. Not one soul in that house would suspect she still had this. Inside, sealed in plastic, sat the navy blue leather binder with the gold-embossed corner that once held her life's blueprint. Her name, L. Whitmore, still glimmered faintly under the grime. She ran her fingers over the zipper, slow and reverent. Then she opened it. The rustle of old paper was louder than it should have been in the cold silence of the unit. Neatly laminated pages stared back at her, savings account ledgers, old brokerage balances, tax statements, notarized letters from attorneys who were now retired or dead. At the very back, behind dividers marked property and assets, was the one document Clare had never asked about, the co-ownership rider, still bearing fresh blue ink from the day Linda made her son and his new wife sign. It had taken them 3 hours to close on the house that day. Clare had glanced at the paperwork impatiently between swipes on her phone, rushing to get back to work, her hands too busy texting to read the fine print, and Ryan Ryan hadn't read a legal document in his life. He trusted his mom. He trusted her then, at least. That had been their mistake. They never imagined the old woman who paid for their house could still remember where she buried her leverage. Flashback. Linda was 29, sitting at a walnut desk under humming fluorescent lights, double-checking municipal bonds for the city's finance department while sipping bitter vending machine coffee. She'd been good with numbers. Too good. Men in cheaper suits had always taken credit for her work, but she didn't mind. She watched everything. She remembered everything. She documented everything. Even back then, she filed things not just for audits, but for moments like this. Now, present day. The receptionist at Garrison and Tate looked barely old enough to rent a car. She glanced up from her computer and smiled politely. "Can I help you?" Linda smiled back. "Tell Simon Tate that Whitmore's back." 5 minutes later, she was ushered into a glass-walled office, lined with law books and espresso machines. Simon Tate, now grayer, slightly heavier but still as sharp, stood up with a look of pleasant surprise. "Linda," he said, grinning. "You still carry that thing?" She patted the binder. "She's been good to me." They sat. She opened the binder between them and turned the pages like chapters of a book only she could read. When she got to the clause, she tapped it lightly with her manicured nail. 51% ownership. No transfer allowed without written consent. Dated and signed. Simon let out a low whistle. "They never revoked it? They never thought I'd remember." He nodded, eyes scanning the rest of the paperwork with growing appreciation. "You kept everything, Linda." "I was trained to," she said simply. They spent the next hour reviewing her options. She listened closely, asked sharp questions, and never once fumbled for words. Every answer she gave was measured, strategic. She was no longer the woman sitting quietly at Claire's table, eating cold stuffing and swallowing humiliation. She was the executor of her own chessboard now. Simon leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "We can initiate a legal freeze on any attempts to refinance or transfer. No need to inform the occupants, not yet." Linda exhaled, slow and steady. It felt like releasing a breath she'd held for a decade. "Make the call," she said. Simon smiled. Then he slid a sleek document folder across the polished wood toward her. "Let's reclaim your house." Linda's fingers hovered over the signature line. Pen uncapped, hand steady. Across from her, Simon simply said, "Once you sign, they won't know what hit them." They didn't even notice when I left. That was the last slap. The suitcase wheels didn't echo. Linda made sure of it. Carpet muffled her steps as she rolled through the front hallway at 5:47 a.m., the sky still tinted with that early blue before the world remembered to open its eyes. No one stirred. She paused at the entry table, where Claire's vase of artificial orchids stood stiff and bright. Plastic perfection, just like the house. Linda opened the drawer beneath it, slid a crisp thank you card inside, and closed it quietly. She didn't write much. Just 2 words. "I remember." Then she stepped outside into the dawn chill, the door clicking shut behind her for what would be the last time, as their dependent. The concierge at the downtown extended stay hotel barely blinked when Linda handed over a platinum card and asked for the top floor. "Will you need help with luggage?" "No," Linda said, smiling faintly. "I've already let go of most of it." The suite smelled of lavender cleaner and fresh linen. Floor-to-ceiling windows faced the skyline, a view she never allowed herself to want. She placed her binder gently on the desk and took a moment before sitting down. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass. This time, not a woman overlooked. A woman in motion. She changed out of her washed-out cardigan and into a soft navy cashmere sweater she'd bought online the night before. No more hand-me-downs to herself. No more Claire's condescension disguised as fashion advice. She pulled out her phone and tapped her lawyer's number. "Simon," she said, her voice steady, "let's start setting up the trust." 3 hours later, while sipping hot chamomile from fine porcelain, she opened her secure bank portal, transfers in motion, holdings restructured. She rerouted her pension distributions into a new account, one Clare and Ryan couldn't trace, touch, or imagine. By lunchtime, she had spoken with a trust advisor, updated her will, and blocked both her son and daughter-in-law from every digital access point. Then Simon called. "She's trying to refinance," he said. "Applied under Ryan's name, but we traced the email trail. It's Claire's plan." Linda sat very still. "She forged his signature?" "Possibly. But here's the kicker." Simon paused. "The lender flagged the application because your name's still attached, and we just filed the freeze. The house can't be touched, not without your permission." Linda didn't smile. She laughed, quietly, deeply, the sound of someone finally remembering their own power. Clare, on the other end of the city, was in her favorite robe when the call came. "What do you mean blocked?" she said sharply into the phone. "There's a co-owner listed," the bank officer explained, bored. "She filed a protective claim. We legally can't proceed." Claire's voice pitched. "She's not even living here." "Doesn't matter. The title's still active. You'll have to work it out with her." Clare slammed the phone down so hard, Ryan came out of the bedroom, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" She turned on him, eyes flashing. "Your mother just froze the refinance." His face drained. "She still owns part of this house," he whispered. "You said she signed it over." "You said that," Ryan murmured. Claire blinked. The words stuck. Her breath hitched. Back in the hotel suite, Linda opened the curtains wider and watched the sunlight pool across the bedspread. She'd always liked the way mornings felt in new places. Clean. Unwritten. Her phone buzzed. "Claire, we need to talk." She muted it. Then came a second notification, not a message, but an alert from the mortgage portal. "Loan request blocked. Ownership challenge filed." Linda tapped the screen, enlarged the document, and reread the heading. "Co-owner authorization required." And under it, her name. Clear. Unshakable. Claire sat stunned, staring at the rejection email. In her inbox, a new message pinged. Subject line: property access. Revoked by primary owner. Claire signed everything, without reading the footnote in the contract. The scream that broke through the suburban morning air wasn't loud enough for police, but it was sharp enough to make Ryan drop his coffee mug. "You didn't tell me!" Claire shouted, eyes blazing. "You didn't tell me she still had ownership!" Ryan blinked. "You said you handled it at closing. I thought you—" She stopped mid-sentence, chest rising and falling with panic. Linda had expected this moment for years. She could picture it clearly from her hotel suite, calm as sunlight, as she flipped through the old co-ownership agreement in her binder. Back then, at the closing table, Claire had been in a rush. Hair professionally curled, fake gratitude dripping from her thank-you hug, her eyes were only on the future, her future. Linda had slipped the clause in on page 9, paragraph 3. It was small, legal, but binding. The clause: co-ownership remains 51-49 unless revoked by mutual consent or in the event of death. Claire had initialed it with a flourish, lipstick barely dried on her smile. Linda had never said a word. She just signed and remembered. Now, as Claire stormed around the living room in her robe, slamming cabinet doors like that could change anything, Ryan stood still, frozen, like a child caught between parents. Only this time, the betrayal wasn't quiet. It was written in ink. "I told you," Claire hissed. "I told you we should have made her sign it over." Ryan looked down at his phone. Linda hadn't answered his last 5 texts. "Maybe," he murmured. "She was just waiting for this." Claire spun on him. "Waiting? You think she's capable of this kind of long-game revenge?" Ryan said nothing. Claire's voice cracked. "It was just a cold plate. She got leftovers like everyone else." "No," Ryan said finally, his voice low. "Everyone else had dinner. She got humiliation." The silence stretched. At the downtown office of Simon and Burke Real Estate Law, Linda sat with poise, one leg crossed over the other, silk scarf neatly tied. The air smelled of polished oak, citrus cleaner, and quiet power. A young associate entered, folder in hand. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we reviewed the deed. You do, in fact, retain controlling ownership. 51%. Linda nodded slowly. "And I want an official property assessment, discreetly." The associate blinked. "You're planning to sell?" "I'm planning to remind them who built the foundation under their feet." Claire's phone buzzed again, this time a call. "Hello?" Yes, this is Stephanie with Cobalt Real Estate Group. We've been contracted to perform an ownership-based valuation of your property. Claire's throat dried. What? There's a co-owner request for a market review, standard procedure for future disposition. Claire's hands shook as she hung up. Ryan finally sat on the couch, burying his face in his hands. What are we going to do? He asked, voice muffled. Claire's voice was a whisper now. We wait and pray she doesn't list it. But deep down, Claire knew better. Linda wasn't the type to scream, to gloat, to throw tantrums. She was the kind who moved in silence, then signed something permanent. Back at the real estate firm, Linda stood as the agent handed her a packet with bold lettering on the cover, Property Evaluation Packet, prepared for Linda Hawthorne, primary owner. She slipped it into her leather bag, turned toward the elevator, and offered a rare smile. Claire receives a certified letter on the doorstep. The return address? A real estate firm. Inside, preliminary notice of intent to sell. They wrapped my leftovers in foil. I wrapped their future in silence. The Christmas tree at Ryan and Claire's house twinkled in the corner. White lights, gold ornaments, an Instagram-filtered version of holiday cheer. But beneath the sparkle, something sour brewed. Linda wasn't there. Her usual seat at the end of the table sat empty. No folded napkin, no wine glass. Just a hollow space, as if the house itself felt the absence of its true architect. Claire didn't mention her mother-in-law out loud, not once, but her social media did all the whispering for her. Christmas is for people who actually contribute. Cheers to fresh starts. Hosting without drama this year. Peace is priceless. Passive-aggressive captions over carefully posed selfies, each one more curated than the last. Claire laughed too loud at dinner, poured wine with forced elegance, but her eyes flickered, always checking the front door, the driveway, her phone, because silence isn't always absence. And Claire was learning that Linda's silence was not retreat, it was planning. Across town, Linda sat in a velvet armchair in her extended stay suite, a tablet on her lap. On screen, a live dashboard from her private asset management team, security feeds, market valuations, and property updates loaded in real time. She tapped once. The image shifted, an aerial drone view of her old house, now scanned and remeasured by her contracted appraiser. Another tap opened the LLC filing she'd registered, Elm and Hawthorne Holdings. Her name sat quietly on the PDF, not loud, just final. A knock at her door broke her concentration. It was the courier, again. Another signed document, confirming the reassessment was underway. The house was officially under financial review, for liquidation readiness. Linda smiled. She hadn't attended Christmas, but she'd delivered a presence far more lasting. Back at the house, chaos was forming in the kitchen. Claire's mother, Patricia, stood at the stove with an apron that read, "Queen of this kitchen." "Why are you boiling the potatoes after the roast is done?" she barked. Claire gritted her teeth. "Because I didn't think I'd be cooking alone. You think throwing rosemary on a rotisserie chicken makes it gourmet?" Ryan slipped past the argument, disappearing into the hallway. He'd barely spoken since the certified letter arrived. The one Claire refused to show him. The one from the real estate firm. His gut told him exactly who it was from. That night, while Patricia slammed cabinets and Claire updated her story with "Holiday stress is real," Claire's phone rang. Unknown number. Local area code. She answered on speaker, still holding a spatula. "Hello? Hi, this is Danielle from Monarch Realty. We're calling to confirm the scheduled reassessment for your property." Claire froze. Reassessment? "Yes, per the request of the managing agent for the holding company." "What holding company?" Claire snapped. Elm and Hawthorne Holdings, the LLC listed as partial owner of your address." Claire's stomach sank. "Who's the agent?" The woman paused. "It's in the public file. Registered agent Linda Hawthorne." Claire hung up, trembling. "What is it?" Patricia asked. Claire didn't answer. Instead, she opened her laptop, hands shaking. She typed in Elm and Hawthorne Holdings, LLC. There it was. Public record. A crisp logo, an address. One name, Linda Hawthorne, registered agent, her mother-in-law, not just a silent matriarch, a ghost who had been haunting the foundation of their life with receipts. And now? She wasn't haunting. She was moving. In her hotel suite, Linda closed her tablet and walked to the window. Snow was falling gently, catching in the streetlight glow like tiny pieces of silver. She stirred her tea, lavender and mint curling into the air, and whispered only 2 words to herself. Merry Christmas. Claire receives a second email. Notice of preliminary valuation. Your property is under consideration for market transfer. I was their burden until they saw my name on the notice. The pen didn't tremble in Linda's hand. She signed the last page of the eviction paperwork with a calm so cold it burned. The courthouse seal gleamed under the dim table lamp in her hotel suite, casting faint shadows on the velvet folder that held her signature. On every page, every clause, every line that would now unravel her son's false kingdom. She paused only once. A name. Ryan Hawthorne. Not Blake, not Darren, not someone else's child. Her son. Her baby boy. And yet, she exhaled, slow and heavy, folding the documents and slipping them into the official envelope marked Service of Notice. This wasn't revenge. This was math and justice. It was raining the day Claire had locked her out. 3 years ago. Spring. The excuse had been, "Oh, I thought you were still at the grocery store, Linda. So sorry." But Linda had watched from the edge of the porch, soaked and shaking, as Claire turned the lock with a little smile curling her lips, just before pulling the curtain shut. Linda had stood there in silence. No yelling, no confrontation, just the sharp chill of realization. She had become an inconvenience in her own investment. Now, the house wouldn't lock her out again. She was the one holding the keys. Claire paced the living room, barefoot, her voice sharp enough to scratch the windows. "She's insane! This is your fault, Ryan! You told her we were refinancing! You gave her the ammo!" Ryan sat slumped at the edge of the couch, face buried in his hands. "I didn't say anything. She knows everything. Claire, this is my mother." "No, she's a bitter woman with too much time and a lawyer on speed dial," Claire snapped. She grabbed her phone, started scrolling furiously through her emails, opening every unread message from Monarch Realty, Hawthorne Legal Services, and the county assessor's office, each one a dagger to her illusion of control. "You said we were in charge now, that we'd remodel. You said—" "I didn't, I'd say, evict my mother," Ryan muttered. His voice was quiet, but the pain in it echoed. Claire turned on him. "She left. She didn't even say goodbye, and now she's pulling strings from a damn hotel suite like she's some mafia boss?" Ryan looked up, hollow-eyed. Maybe she finally realized she never had to beg for space in a house she helped buy. Claire's lips parted, but she had no comeback. Just anger, just fire. And then, 3 hard knocks at the door. Both of them froze. Claire approached slowly, fingers tightening around the brass handle. She opened the door. A man in a gray overcoat stood in the rain, holding a sealed envelope in a plastic sleeve. "Legal service for Claire and Ryan Hawthorne," he said, handing it over with the solemn efficiency of a man who's served hundreds like it before. "Per court order, please review and follow the listed timeline. You have 30 days. Claire didn't speak. She didn't breathe. She just stared, as if the envelope might burn through her hands. Upstairs, the house creaked. Like it knew, the kitchen faucet dripped. The air smelled faintly of cloves from the scented candle Claire had lit earlier to cover the tension. Ryan took the envelope from her, peeled it open, and read in silence. His face turned ashen. She didn't have to ask. She already knew. In her hotel suite, Linda watched the rain tap gently against her window. She sat in a silk robe, feet curled under her, a cup of green tea warming her palms. Her phone buzzed on the table. Ryan calling. She turned it over, screen down. A second buzz, voicemail, new. Still, she didn't move. Instead, she looked out at the city skyline, then back at the leather folder that had changed everything. The burden they thought they carried had a name on it. And now? So did the deed. Claire drops the notice on the floor. Her eyes scanned the signature at the bottom. Linda Hawthorne, 51% legal owner. They called me heartless, but no one recalled that cold plate. The ring light flickered once, then glowed steady. Claire sat on the couch in her designer robe, hair perfectly tousled, mascara smudged just enough to scream heartbreak. She adjusted the camera angle, positioned the eviction notice in view like a trophy of victimhood, then hit Go Live. "Hey everyone." Her voice trembled. I don't even know how to say this. I never thought my own mother-in-law would evict us. Just weeks before New Year's. Hundreds joined, then thousands. She lived with us, ate our food, slept in our house, our home, Claire choked out, eyes glassy. And now she's left us homeless, without even a conversation, just a notice taped to our door. A few hearts floated across the screen, then comments. "OMG, what a monster. What kind of MIL does that? You're so strong." Claire sniffled. "We didn't deserve this. I didn't deserve this." But in the hotel suite a few miles away, Linda sat at her desk, tea untouched. The same live stream played on mute. She watched Claire cry for a crowd that hadn't been there last Thanksgiving, hadn't seen the smirk as cold turkey hit her plate, hadn't heard the snide jokes passed off as harmless humor, hadn't smelled the betrayal simmering beneath every fake smile. Linda didn't flinch. She didn't type a rebuttal. She let silence do what words never could, make people curious. That silence echoed all the way to Ryan. He showed up at her hotel 2 days later, not announced, not invited. His shoulders slumped, shirt wrinkled, voice cracked. "I didn't know she was going to post that," he said, not meeting her eyes. "She said she was just venting. I didn't know." "You didn't know a lot of things," Linda replied softly. He nodded, sat across from her like a boy again. "Mom, please, don't kick us out. We'll figure something out." Claire was upset. She didn't mean what she said about you moving out, or the cold plate, or the refinancing. Linda leaned forward. "You saw the footage, Ryan, the emails, the documents. You knew the truth. I just wanted peace," he muttered. "You got quiet," she said, "but I never got peace." He didn't respond. That night, Linda sat alone by the window, city lights blinking through the glass. She picked up her fountain pen and began writing. "Dear Ryan, I didn't want this. I only ever wanted to be respected in the home I helped you build. You watched me shrink for years. This isn't punishment. This is preservation." She paused, folded the letter neatly, slipped it into an envelope, then placed it in the drawer. Unsent. Meanwhile, Claire wasn't done. The stream had faded, sympathy thinning. A few commenters had started asking questions. "Wait, isn't the house in the MIL's name? And didn't she pay for it?" Panicked, Claire emailed a journalist from a local digital outlet. The subject line read, "Urgent, elder abuse cover-up by manipulative Emil." She offered her version of the story, photos of the eviction, even a cropped video of Linda walking into a courtroom. She ended with, "Let me know when you..." everything. The reply came within hours, but it wasn't what Claire expected. From Naomi Chen, Investigative Desk. Subject, Urgent Story Lead. "Hi Claire, thanks for reaching out. I'll be in touch shortly. In the meantime, I've already scheduled an in-person interview with Linda Hawthorne." Warmly, Naomi Claire reads the email, jaw clenched, fingers shaking, as her narrative begins slipping from her grip. "They told their story. I showed mine, with documents and dignity." The knock came at exactly 10 a.m., precise, unhurried, professional. Linda had been waiting, seated on the velvet armchair of her downtown suite, the binder already on the table, perfectly aligned beside a cup of chamomile tea she hadn't touched. When she opened the door, Naomi Chen stood there with a notepad in one hand and a recorder in the other. No camera crew, no theatrics, just curiosity. "Mrs. Hawthorne?" Naomi asked, her voice calm but clearly ready to dive into the mess Claire had stirred online. Linda stepped aside, gesturing her in. "Please, I'd like you to hear it all, the real version." The suite was warm, sun filtering through sheer curtains, casting golden strips across the oak floors. Naomi sat, clicked the recorder on, and looked up. "I've read the claims," she said, "but I've learned to wait before believing tears online." Linda smiled. Small, controlled. Good. Because crocodile tears ruined lives long before TikTok did. She slid the binder forward and began. First, the transfer document, the $80,000 from her pension, traced directly to the down payment. Next, the co-ownership clause in the mortgage, complete with Claire's hasty signature and a timestamp, proof of her obliviousness and Linda's foresight. Then came the screenshots, texts from Clare mocking Linda's clothes, her mind, her poor woman energy. Over those were recorded voice memos, with Clare whispering, "Once she's out, we'll tear up that ugly guest room. I want a Pilates space." Linda played the audio without a flinch. Naomi blinked. "Did you always know?" "No," Linda said, "but I started watching when the plates got colder and the smiles got warmer." Naomi's expression shifted. No longer journalist, but woman. "This is going to make people rethink everything." "I'm not doing this for people," Linda said. "I'm doing it for the women who are told to shut up and be grateful." Naomi nodded slowly, eyes never leaving Linda's. "May I quote that?" "You may." The article went live within 48 hours. She wasn't just the mother-in-law. She owned the house. The piece exploded. Screenshots, audio clips, legal deeds. Naomi published it all with consent. The comments flooded in. "This woman is a genius. How many of our moms and grandmas are silently living like this?" Clare who? By midnight, Claire's social media accounts had vanished. Deleted. Burned to digital ash. Linda watched it all unfold from her hotel suite. But not with glee. With quiet clarity. The truth didn't need applause. It just needed a stage. The doorbell rang again. She knew this knock. Ryan. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. His tie hung loose, shirt untucked, eyes rimmed red. "She's gone," he croaked. "Claire, she left." Linda didn't speak, just studied him. "She cleaned out the joint account," he said, voice trembling. "The house fund, the savings, even the rainy day one. Everything." He collapsed into the same velvet chair the journalist had occupied days earlier. "I told you," Linda said gently. "Years ago." Ryan buried his face in his hands. "She left a note, said I was just another pawn with mommy issues, that I let her do the dirty work because I never had the guts." Linda walked to the sideboard, poured him a glass of water. That may be the first honest thing she ever said. He looked up, ashamed. "Mom, I didn't mean to let this happen." "But you did." The silence stretched. Only the hum of the city below filled the space between them. "I should have protected you," he whispered. Linda sat across from him. Calm. Composed. "No, Ryan. You should have remembered who built your roof before you let someone else measure it for drapes." Ryan wipes his face, pulls out his phone and stares at the bank app, his hands shaking. "The account's not just empty. It's negative. She took out a loan. In my name. I lost a son, but I gained peace." The house was silent again. But this time, it wasn't the kind of silence that echoed like grief or isolation. It was softer, intentional. Linda sat near the window of her temporary downtown suite, the sunlight landing on her face like a gentle benediction. There was no clatter from the kitchen, no Claire's stilettos clicking across hardwood, no awkward silences between forced conversations. Only the hum of city life beyond the glass, and the quiet voice inside her that finally sounded like her own. Her phone buzzed once on the marble end table beside her. She didn't reach for it immediately. She sipped her tea, steady hands, pinky slightly lifted, a posture she hadn't worn in years. She had signed the papers that morning. The lakeside property was hers now. No co-signers, no contingencies. Just her name, carved in ink across deeds and dreams both. A modest home, nestled in a quiet town 2 hours north. White shutters, a wraparound porch, and windows that kissed the lake. When she toured it last week, the air had smelled like pine and baked bread from a neighbor's kitchen. She'd felt something in her chest unclench. That's when she knew. This wouldn't be a temporary escape. This would be her beginning. She rose and moved slowly through the suite, her bare feet brushing against the cool hardwood. On the small dining table near the balcony sat her travel easel. A half-finished canvas caught the morning light. She hadn't painted in almost 20 years, not since Ryan was in college, and she was still dreaming of a family who'd care for her as she had for them. Now, she traced the soft blue outline of the lake scene she'd started. The brush in her hand felt weightless. A familiar ache fluttered in her fingers, the ache of creativity long stifled. Next to the easel was a folder with printed brochures. Women's Refuge Alliance volunteer program. She hadn't walked into the shelter yet, but she planned to next week. They helped older women, many of them mothers, who'd been financially and emotionally displaced. Some lived in silence for years. Some never had a Linda moment, a moment to rise. She would tell them, "You are not a burden. You are a blueprint." The buzz came again. A second call. She sighed, finally reaching for the phone. Unknown number. Her thumb hovered. Part of her wanted to ignore it. She had grown to enjoy the peace of the unknown. No more waiting for apologies or explanations. No more hope wrapped in empty maybe next time promises. But something pressed at her chest, a gut feeling she couldn't silence. She answered. "Linda?" The voice was strained. Female, middle-aged. "Yes? This is Claire's mother, Jean." Linda blinked, momentarily thrown off by the name she hadn't spoken aloud in months. Jean's voice cracked like she'd been rehearsing this moment and still wasn't ready. I need to speak with you," Jean continued, clearing her throat. "Not to defend her. God knows I won't. But there's something you deserve to know, something I only just learned. It's about Clare." Linda stood frozen, hand clutching the back of the chair, as if the call had shifted gravity around her. John sounded serious, not guilty, not dramatic, but careful, like someone holding a fragile truth. "What about Clare?" Linda asked, her voice flat, guarded. "I can't say over the phone. Can we meet? Please." Linda hesitated, heart thudding in the long pause. The last time she saw Jean was at the baby shower years ago, long before Claire's cold smile turned into something sharper. And now she was calling with secrets. "I'll think about it," Linda said at last. Jean's sigh was audible. "All right, just let me know. For what it's worth, I'm sorry." Linda hung up without another word. She turned back toward the window. Her tea had gone cold. She didn't mind. Outside, the wind rustled the curtains softly, like someone exhaling truth. The mother says, "I need to talk. It's about Clare. She called me crazy, but I saved everything." The cafe was quiet except for the occasional clink of spoons against porcelain. Linda sat across from Jean, hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes calm but unblinking. She didn't touch the coffee the waitress had placed in front of her. She had no appetite for comfort today. Not after hearing what Jean had just told her. "She said you were slipping," Jean murmured, voice trembling as she stared down at her cup. "Said you were forgetting things, that you'd left the stove on twice in 1 week, and that you couldn't remember where you were some days." Linda blinked slowly, letting the words wash over her like she hadn't already lived them. "And you believed her?" Jean shook her head. "I wanted to. I didn't want to think—" She paused, breath shaky. "That my daughter was capable of what she was planning." "What was she planning?" Linda asked, though she already knew. Jean looked up, eyes glossy. "She was going to put you in a care facility, quietly, the kind where no one asks questions. She said it would give her control over your finances and make Ryan's life easier. She thought you wouldn't fight." Linda let the silence hang. "She said once you were out of the picture, she'd refinance the house and have it just the way it should have been from the beginning." Those were her words. Linda finally picked up her cup, but only to warm her fingers. "She always did speak in renovations." Jean swallowed hard, regret flashing across her face like lightning through clouded skies. "I'm sorry, I thought maybe she was exaggerating, but now that I've seen the news, read the article, I know she wasn't." Linda nodded slowly. "She made a mistake, Jean. She underestimated a woman who'd already rebuilt herself once." That night, back at her suite, Linda sat cross-legged on her bed, phone in hand. The room was dim, save for the amber glow of a bedside lamp and the soft white screen of her voice memo app. She hadn't opened it in years, not since she started using it as a diary of sorts. Tiny bits of thought, little whispers to herself. She scrolled through recordings with neutral titles: November 14th, Notes, Dinner with Clare, Call with Ryan. Her thumb paused. Clare, Kitchen, January 3rd. She pressed play. Claire's voice filtered through, too crisp to be innocent. If she slips just once, I can make the case to Ryan. He's already overwhelmed. She just needs to mess up visibly. Linda's lips pressed together. Another memo. This time, Clare, phone call, February 8th. Clare again. She doesn't even remember her own passwords. I could have her accounts closed in a day. Ryan would believe me. He always does. The next was a conversation between Clare and someone she didn't recognize. Her pension's still active. Once she's in care, we'll set up a legal route. My cousin's firm can do it. Ryan's been hinting about getting a new car. We deserve this. Linda sat still as stone, her pulse quiet but deep. She hadn't just been dismissed. She'd been strategically erased piece by piece, but not completely. She sent the recordings, over a dozen in total, to her lawyer via encrypted email. The next morning, her attorney's voice was crisp with a controlled excitement. Linda, this is substantial. We're reopening the fraud case. Immediately. Will it hold? With this? Absolutely. And there's more. Linda's breath hitched. We're not just fighting the co-ownership. We can argue premeditated financial manipulation, asset misrepresentation, and coordinated elder coercion. If the judge agrees, Linda finished for him, voice steely, I get the full value of the house. Yes, the lawyer confirmed. And more. By the afternoon, her phone vibrated with a court date. A formal hearing, just 2 weeks away. Linda stood by the window of her suite again, this time in a navy blazer and pearl earrings. No cardigans, no apology in her posture. The city outside buzzed with traffic, deadlines, and lives spinning forward. But in this moment, Linda stood still, centered by her own resolve, not for revenge, but for the truth that had been long buried beneath warm smiles and cold plates. She reached for her phone, opened her voice memo app once more, and clicked record. My name is Linda Wexler, she began, voice clear, and I remember everything. Linda gets a court date. She might take the entire house value. They forgot the clause I buried in the contract. I didn't. The courtroom was sterile and cool, filled with that silent tension only truth could crack. Linda sat calmly at the plaintiff's table, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Her silk blouse was pale gray, a soft contrast to the sharp glint in her eyes. On the opposite side, Clare fidgeted with the cuffs of her blazer, face pale under her full face of makeup. Ryan wasn't there. The judge adjusted his glasses, flipping through the thick folder of documents the lawyers had submitted. Mrs. Wexler, your counsel, has filed an emergency motion for ownership reclassification. What are you asking this court to do? Linda's lawyer stood. We're asking for recognition of sole ownership based on a quitclaim clause embedded in the original co-ownership contract, language that was legally binding and signed by both parties. The courtroom murmured softly. Clare blinked. What clause? She hissed under her breath to her attorney. He didn't answer. Linda's eyes didn't move from the bench. She didn't gloat, didn't blink. The lawyer continued, voice calm and deliberate. The clause clearly states that should the marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Wexler dissolve or face substantial strain, any shared claim Clare Wexler held over the home would be rendered void, pending a court determination. That clause was drafted in escrow and signed by Mrs. Clare Wexler during the closing process in 2017. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're telling me this clause was part of the original transaction? Linda's attorney handed over a single laminated sheet from the binder Linda had retrieved weeks ago. Yes, Your Honor. Line 47, subsection B. A hush fell over the courtroom. The judge read the section, then looked up. Mrs. Wexler, he said, directing the question to Clare this time, were you aware of this clause when you signed? Clare swallowed, eyes darting. I was told it was boilerplate. Just legal fluff. No one explained that. Did you sign the document? the judge interrupted. Her shoulders fell. Yes, she admitted. The gavel came down like thunder. Then your claim to the property is nullified as per the enforceable clause. Sole ownership hereby reverts to Linda Wexler. Linda exhaled slowly, the sound softer than a whisper, but deep her chest. It felt like the roar of a dam breaking. Her lawyer leaned in and whispered, "It's done. You own everything." Claire looked stunned, frozen like a mannequin with no script to follow. She stood, opened her mouth, then sat again, defeated. There was no backup plan now. Later that week, the house sold in a matter of hours. The market was hot, the location pristine, the emotional satisfaction priceless. Linda stood across the street watching the new buyers hand keys to their young daughter. She wore a backpack too big for her frame, her hair tied in a floppy pink bow. She reminded Linda of herself, decades ago, full of silent fire no one saw coming. The closing price came in nearly 3 times what Linda had invested years earlier, and she didn't keep a cent for herself. Instead, she walked into her bank, requested a transfer from her trust, and filled out a donation slip with one word in the recipient field: anonymous. The recipient? A local nonprofit for senior women, one she'd volunteered with quietly over the past year. She wrote the check for $200,000. When they received it, they called her. She let it go to voicemail. But when the nonprofit publicly thanked their mystery donor and posted a tribute on social media, they included a small note in the caption. She came in silence, gave in strength, and left behind a legacy we'll never forget. The post spread quickly. Local news picked it up. Then national. By the following week, Linda Wexler's story, once buried under casserole dishes and passive-aggressive holiday smiles, was front page on a major feature titled "The Mill Who Owned the House and the Final Word." She donates a huge sum anonymously to a senior women's nonprofit. The nonprofit reveals Linda's story on national media. "This year, no one served me anything. I served stories, wine, and laughter." The clink of silverware was different this year. No tension, no side glances, no cold turkey plated with cold intentions. Linda stood at the head of a long, warmly set wooden table in her new dining room, the lake view glittering just beyond the tall glass windows behind her. Soft jazz hummed through the speakers, mingling with laughter that rose naturally, not forced through clenched teeth like last year. The scent of roasted vegetables, buttery bread rolls, and freshly carved turkey filled the air. It didn't come from a store-bought tray or someone else's leftovers. It came from love, and everyone brought their share. Across from her sat Mary and Janine, 2 women from the shelter she'd volunteered at for the last few months, women who reminded her of herself, once dismissed, once invisible. Beside them was her attorney, Elena, sharp as ever, now softened by her 3rd glass of Merlot and a plate of candied yams. On Linda's left sat Ava, a retired school principal she'd met in her book club. They had bonded over Alice Walker and wine. No one called her extra. No one looked past her. Here, she wasn't a burden or background noise. She was the host, the center, the storyteller. "And that," Linda said, finishing a tale about her late husband fixing their broken radiator with duct tape and a prayer, "is how we nearly froze to death but kept our marriage intact." Laughter erupted around the table, warm and full. Glasses were lifted. "To memory," Linda said, raising her own. "And to finally being seen," Ava added. "To strength," Mary whispered, eyes wet but smiling. They clinked. The sound was gentle but rang louder than any applause Linda had ever received. She took a sip and leaned back, allowing herself to savor more than just the food. She savored peace. It tasted like cranberry sauce and quiet validation. Later that evening, as the guests gathered in the living room, Ava offered to help with dishes. Linda waved her off, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Tonight, no one cleans. We only celebrate." It was nearly 9 when the last of the guests hugged her goodbye, stepping into the cool autumn air under a sky bursting with stars. Linda stood at the door, wrapped in a soft shawl, holding a half-full glass of wine. Her bare feet pressed into the hardwood floors, her home. every inch of it whispered freedom. She turned to blow out the candles on the table when a soft knock interrupted the quiet. A courier stood at the doorstep, hat low, holding a small rectangular box. "For Ms. Linda Wexler," he said, confirming her name. She signed for it and shut the door gently behind her. The box was plain, no return address, just her name, handwritten in a familiar scrawl. She placed it on the kitchen counter and carefully removed the tape. Inside was a thick ivory envelope tucked neatly between layers of brown parchment paper. Her name was written on the front, Linda. Her hand trembled slightly, not with fear, but with that complex cocktail of anticipation and old, aching memory. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Ryan. She sat down at the table, the last flicker of candlelight dancing. On the envelope's surface, she didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, she traced her fingers across her name and thought of every plate she'd served, every thankless hour spent cooking, cleaning, loving, sacrificing. She thought of how silence had once been her prison, and now it was her kingdom. In the distance, a loon called across the lake. Linda looked out the window, the stars reflecting in her glass. She leaned back and smiled, the envelope still unopened beside her. A final package arrives at her door. It's a handwritten apology note from Ryan. "They mocked me over a plate. I fed them their fate." The letter sat on the edge of the table all night. Linda didn't move it, didn't open it. She simply let it exist, like a ghost of a past that no longer had power over her. The morning light poured in through the tall windows of her lakeside home, casting golden hues across the hardwood floors. Her robe, silk and slate blue, trailed behind her as she stepped barefoot into the quiet living room. The fireplace crackled softly, already warm from the fire she'd stoked earlier. Her wineglass from last night rested untouched beside the letter. She picked it up now, turning the envelope over once in her hand. Her name, his handwriting. It was Ryan's final attempt. An apology, perhaps. A plea. Maybe even regret wrapped in nostalgia. But regret was currency too many people only tried to spend when the market closed. Linda had seen enough of that kind of timing. She broke the seal carefully, not because she was eager, but because closure deserved respect. The letter was short. No justifications, no explanations, just 6 lines, shaky in ink but saturated with a kind of honesty that came too late. "Mom, I should have stood up. I knew it was wrong. I chose peace over truth. I lost both." Linda blinked slowly. Her chest ached, not from sorrow, but from the echo of something that once lived there. Love still lived there too, but it no longer ruled her. She folded the letter back neatly, kissed the edge of the paper once, and walked over to the fireplace. The flames hissed and welcomed it. As the paper curled into blackened petals, she poured herself a glass of wine. Not out of sadness, but ritual. She had built this new chapter on rituals, morning yoga, evening walks, reading, and reclaiming parts of herself she'd lost while raising people who no longer looked back. She stood in front of the fireplace, letting the warmth hug her calves. Outside, the lake shimmered like a mirror, holding no lies. Her reflection, cast faintly in the glass, was no longer that of someone overlooked. It was the face of a woman who had been both the storm and the shelter. The television buzzed faintly from the kitchen, and Linda, out of habit, turned toward it. And in tonight's human interest spotlight, meet the woman who turned humiliation into a headline. Once mocked as the freeloader Mill, she's now the face of quiet resistance. Her name is Linda Rowe, and her story is making waves. She took a slow sip, the wine sweet, full-bodied, like revenge, if revenge wore lipstick and a pressed blazer. Footage flashed across the screen, still shots of her lake house, her lawyer walking confidently out of the courthouse, and a blurred image of Clare mid-tantrum being escorted from what was once their home. A voiceover recapped the story, careful not to paint her as vengeful, but victorious. The host concluded, "In a world where older women are often told to sit down, Linda stood up, with documentation." Linda chuckled softly. The news segment ended. The silence returned, not empty, but earned. She walked slowly down the hallway, her fingers grazing the smooth wall she had painted herself. Past the kitchen, past the room now filled with canvases and easels, toward the small guest room where she kept the only box labeled "Before." She didn't open it. Instead, she turned back, pausing to glance at a frame on the wall. Inside was the original deed to the house Claire once called hers. Signed by Linda. Only Linda. She'd had it preserved, matted in ivory, and beneath it, a single engraved brass plate. What's mine was always mine. The wind outside rustled the trees gently, like an audience applauding with leaves. She poured the rest of the wine into her glass, walked to the balcony, and leaned against the railing, letting the breeze lift her hair. The sun had begun to dip toward the lake, painting everything gold and defiant. She closed her eyes and smiled. They served me scraps. I served them consequences.